Being a man instead of a Muppet means you're in charge. A Muppet has a hand inside of him, or he's controlled by someone from the outside. Many men are living their lives controlled by others. They just are. But that's not how we should live as men. We should be in charge of ourselves. We should be men who are willing to walk that road of being in charge of themselves. And you say, well, what does that look like? Well, for one thing, it looks like a man who accepts responsibility. Every man who is in charge of himself is willing to take responsibility for his thoughts and his actions. It means he's willing to do what he has to do, and he's willing to take the responsibility for it. See, we're living in a culture today that just wants to blame everybody, to be a victim. Real men don't act that way. Real men don't act like victims. Real men take responsibility. They look at what they did and they accept consequences, good and bad. You may do something that does great. You may do something that makes you $1 billion. Great. But if you do something that loses $1 billion, you got to take responsibility for that too. Men who are in charge are men who focus on full ownership of themselves, full ownership of their choices. Now, accepting responsibility means understanding we're not going to get everything right. We're not perfect. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean I'm going to make every decision perfect, but it's not being afraid to make a decision. And that's the key part. You're going to make the decision with the best information you have at the time. Hesitancy can cause more damage than making a clear decision. Have you ever been driving behind a hesitant driver? They're scary. I would rather a driver make a decision, even if it's not the best decision, because then I can respond accordingly. But if they hesitate, they start to do one thing and start to do the other, you don't know what to do behind them. And a lot of men are living their life that way. And men who understand responsibility are going to make a decision when the time comes to make a decision. They're not going to hesitate. They're not going to wait till everything is perfect. They're not going to wait till they know everything. They're going to make a decision at the time the decision needs to be made. You see, a lot of guys hold off and they think, well, let me get a little bit more information. And what they really want to know is this the best decision before they make the decision? There's no way for you to know that. You've got to be realistic. And if you're going to keep waiting to make a decision, it's going to hurt your ability to lead as a man. And a man who's in charge is also a man who gives direction. You see, it's a man who's in charge of himself and he picks a direction to go. A lot of guys today are just sitting and waiting. They're waiting for everything to work out by itself. Well, I hope it works. I hope something works out. In charge men don't wait. They don't sit around. They choose a direction and they start moving. It doesn't mean they just do whatever. They make the best decision at the time. I think this is the best direction for me. And they start going that direction. They start moving. You see, picking a direction doesn't mean you're going to change directions all the time. It means you're picking one way to go and you're moving that way. You see, that's important for men. Too many men are afraid to make a decision. They're afraid to commit to things. So you see guys not getting married. Why? Because they don't want to get married, because they're scared. Well, what if it's not perfect? What if she's not the right one? I want to keep my options open. And that's their excuse to not make a decision. They're scared to pick a direction. A lot of guys do that with jobs. A lot of guys do that just with dating in general. They're scared to commit to someone. They're scared to go out with someone because they're scared, is this the right direction? And the key that you want to understand that committing to a direction doesn't mean that your direction won't change in the future. You want to keep your options open in some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, that just takes away from your decision. See, if you get married, but you keep your options open, that's not good. It's not going to be a good marriage. It's not going to last long, and it's going to be a problem. You can keep some options open. Like if you take a job, you can say, hey, I'm going to take this job, but if another job comes along, I may take it. But what it means is you're not going to take away from that job that you're in. You want to give your best to that job. You've said, hey, I'm picking this job. I'm doing this job. I'm going to give it my all. Now, if something else comes along later, fine, but I'm not going to sit here and keep looking and it's going to distract me from the job I have to do. That's what it means to pick a direction. We can't let fear be the biggest influencer in our life, or you'll never make a decision. You'll just keep waiting and waiting and put it off. Men who are in charge of themselves make the decision. They choose a direction in their own life, in their jobs, in everything they do. Men who are in charge also just take action. You see, in charge men are not afraid to take action. When it comes time to move, they move. And we've kind of talked about that already. But it's important to do that today. It's important to know that because a lot of guys just sit back. They won't make a decision. They won't take action. And a lot of guys, what they do is they'll make a decision, but then they don't take action. They make the decision in their mind. They think, okay, I've made this, I'm going to do it. But then they don't do anything. So you know what? They really haven't taken any action, which means they're not really making the decision. They made the decision to feel good about it, but they're not taking any action, which means they really didn't make the decision. Action is the culmination of a decision. Without action, there's been no decision. There's not, because action always follows a decision. If you're not taking action, you didn't really make a decision. You may pretend you did, but it's not coming out. You see, we don't need to rush decisions. We don't need to say, okay, well, maybe I'll make decisions, maybe not, or I got to make it right now. But sometimes you do. But whenever you make a decision, you need to make it and take action on it. We got to take time to think clearly what's going to happen. But once the decision is made, you take action. You don't hold back. You know, it's like a guy who decides, I'm going to ask this girl out. I'm going to go ask her out. Well, it's not really a real decision until he actually asks her out. There's a lot of guys who talk about it. Every weekend they say, oh, this is the weekend. I'm going to ask her out. I'm going to ask her out. But then they don't. Why? Because they're not taking any action. So they didn't really make the decision. It's a hope. It's kind of a dream they have of asking her out, but they're not really doing it. And too many men are living in that dream state today. They imagine a lot of things. They imagine themselves doing a lot of things, but they're not taking any action. And if you're not taking action, you really didn't make a decision. Now understand, action doesn't mean perfection. It just means movement. Movement brings that feedback, and feedback helps us make better decisions in the future. Your first decision may not be your best decision, but you know what? You'll make the decision, you'll get feedback, then you'll make your second decision, then your third decision. And each time you're going to take action, and the feedback you get from that action is going to help you make better decisions in the future. The truth is, Muppets have someone controlling them. They just do. They're not in charge. And too many men today are letting society control them, letting other people control them, or letting their own fears control them. It's time for us to step up as men and be in charge of ourselves, our decisions, and everything we do.